Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to go over some tips and things on routing mechanical shift cables and could be brake cables as well into internally routed frames. I saw on a Facebook thread a while back some people having issues with the cables being crossed inside of the frame, and so they're becoming more and more popular with the aero frames and TT bikes, tri-bikes, if you want to call them that, whatever. You know, back 15, 20 years ago, they weren't very common. I remember doing a few of the early Kleins that had them, and yeah, those things were a major pain. You had to put new cables in them, or sometimes even the brand new ones, they would come with the cables crossed over each other inside the frame, and you know, you couldn't see them, so you would have these weird mystery shift issues, and took a little, about made you want to pull your hair out and things until we figured out kind of what was going on with that whole deal. But anyway, past few months I've had a few little I don't know, potential problems, I guess you could say, that can be the cause of some mystery symptoms in the shifting. And so this is just a little video. It's going to have some tips and things on some things I found through the years of making routing these cables a little easier, a little quicker. And you know, basically there's two different type situations here. You could have a frame that's already has the cables run. You're going to run new cables, or say you're going to get some new shifters, upgrade some components, things like that, but the bike basically already has cables run. If that's the case, you can just run some, I usually like to keep some little Teflon tubes on hand that, you know, from building bikes or whatever. But basically you just take the, you know, unhook your derailleurs, and you pull, as far as the rear derailleur, pull the housing off, and then just slip these little tubes over the inner wire. You know, typically I'll slip one through the back end of the frame, and then have a brake there at the bottom bracket or the cable guide, and then slip one up through the couple through the down tube there. So just makes things a lot easier. The other style, the other second way of that you could run into is you basically have a bare frame, and then you just got to slip the cables through it there. So got a few little tips on that as well. So this bike, I'm going to actually, it's obviously externally routed cables, and I'm going to do a few things here to kind of simulate what happens when those cables get crossed up and such there. So yeah, let's just jump right into it. So a lot of times I like to use these little rare earth magnets, or you know, the ones, the little magnet that came off of an SRM. But any of those little magnets work really well for kind of guiding the tubes through the frames there. So you know, this Cervelo, it's got a little opening. Sometimes you can get lucky and they just fish right through, but sometimes it's helpful on some frames to have that little magnet. You can kind of guide it through a lot of the internal brake cables that go through the rear. Sometimes you can kind of guide them through, and then grab it with a little, you know, either a hook, a pick that's like a hook end on it, or I have a lot of spokes, like bladed spokes with a hook on the end. Sometimes you can just see them, but you can't quite, you know, you can hook it with that and pull it on through. But a little magnet thing works pretty good. I use this little setup quite a bit. It's definitely a time saver just for pulling bare cables through if you don't have any guide tubes there. So you got that set up. Sometimes this is one thing that's pretty important, that I've seen this a few times, which this came off of a Specialized, and there's supposed to be these little tubes, which you want to use as like a ferrule with a Teflon tube built on, or in this particular case, the bike would have came with some little tubes like this. I know some of the Treks have that as well, but if you don't run those little tubes, you'll actually run the risk of actually filing through a groove into the little cable stop there, and that'll definitely affect your shifting for sure there. So yeah, if the bike came with those little tubes, make sure you put those back in there. And this is a lot of your aero handlebars now, you have to run some cable housing through. So that's the new cables and such, all new cable and housing. So kind of some tricks I like to do. I'll use some actual old, a lot of the old shift and brake cables that I get, rather than throw them away. If they're in decent shape, I'll save them if they're long. And just make sure they're really clean, no corrosion on them. Get all the dirt and grease off, because you're basically running those through brand new housings. And cut the bad ends that are crimped so they'll slide through everything pretty easily. And I'll use these as just little guide wires, slide them through your new housing. And the housings you want to cut pretty close to how long they're going to need to be. Maybe a little long, not excessively long, but maybe a few inches longer than you think you're going to need. You can trim them up at the end, but you'll want to have just a little bit of, maybe a foot or so or more of inner wire sticking out through the end of the housing. And then you'll have your, whatever the end, your cylinder end, what engages into the shift or brake lever or whatnot, butted at the end of the cable. And so you can just fish the inner wires through. In this case, it's, a lot of the bars, there's a opening, on either side of the stem. Well, these you go actually through the bottom of the stem. It's all one piece, so you basically have 3 holes. And in this case, the rear brake, rear derailleur go through that hole there, and then they're going to come out on the bar on that side. So just quick and easy way, just fish these things through there, poke them through, and normally you can see them come through, or once you have a visual on them going through the hole there, you can grab them with a pick, or sometimes they just want to work their way through. In this particular bar, we want to go through the hole that's on the inside of the bar, so they naturally want to go right through the outside. So once you get both your little wires through there, I just push them straight through to the other side where they're going to need to end up going through there. So just push them right on through there, and then from there you can just you can pull on these cables, and by pulling on the inner wire with that end at the pulling against the end of the housing, I guess you could say. It just it's pretty easy just to sometimes you got to do a little push pull on the cable in and kind of push the housing through and get them around the bends and things. But normally pretty easy to just work them through. Normally I'll do this with the handlebars on the bike, but this particular system, the stem is connected there, so you kind of got to work them through off the bike to get them started there. So normally once I have them at this point, I'll have everything on the bike, and then run the brake shift levers there down low, get everything hooked up, get your wires routed, and then slowly slide them up to the cables and position everything, then tight it, and then you can finish routing your wires and such. And this particular bike, this is a different bike, but this is one that has the cables crossed up inside of the bike there. So obviously you can't really see it, and this is basically, I'm shifting the rear shifter. It's kind of hard to get it all in frame. I'll break it down a little more closely here in just a second, but you can see I'm not shifting the front derailleur at all. That's just all input from the rear. They're crossed over, but I thought this bike would be a good example. This is an actual bike that came across into the work area that had that issue. So I would describe this as just your typical cable setup. You got your front shift cable, starts from the left side. You got your rear derailleur cable. It's going to start from the right side there. So I've seen sometimes where a lot of guys, when they build bikes, some shops, they like to start the rear from this side, so you don't get any rubbing or anything on the head tube or whatnot. So what they'll do is they'll start the rear from this side, the front from this side, and the cables will cross in an X one time through at the middle. Personally, I don't really like to do that because, I don't know, it seems like sometimes they do rub against each other, and sometimes they will rattle against each other as well. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect these and then kind of show what happens sometimes when these are being routed and what can cause the old loop over issue there. Okay, so I've got the wires loose here, and typically what happens, you're going to thread these through the frame. They're going to come out through a hole here, and you may not be able to really see what's how they're going. Sometimes they may be crossed like so. From here you can determine just by shifting which one is which. So I've determined this is the rear one, so without being able to see through there, you see it's on the wrong side. So it's super easy just to accidentally, rather than go the correct way like that, you don't really know which way they're routed through there. So let's take this back. So they're crossed, right? So rather than going the correct way, this way, you got a 50-50 chance of going this way, saying, oh, well, that's on that side. And so from there, cables get routed, and then I can kind of show you what happens here in just a second. I'll hook everything back up, but just kind of a quick, easy way to tell. If I can get this a little lower where you can see better, that if I pull hard on this one and I pull on this one, you can feel it pulling on the cable. So with them being correctly, I pull on this one, I feel no input on this one when I'm pulling on that one. So that's just a quick little way to make sure that they're routed correctly. I'm going to go ahead and spin these around, hook it back up, and we'll see what happens here. Okay, so I've got everything hooked back up. Got the dreaded crossover loop of confusion here, and so let's go ahead and just rotate this bike down. Alright, so try not to hit our camera here. Flip that over right there. Let's try this. Okay, so got everything on there, and so basically I just put some new cables on, and I'm going to fine-tune my derailleur adjustments here. So front derailleur is all the way in the small ring. Click it up one. I need to add a little cable tension to get her dialed in, which I would typically do. That looks pretty good there. And seems to be working pretty good, going through all the gears. Now what happens now, I put some tension on it on the cables, shift up to the big ring. Now our rear adjustment is half a step up. Shift it down, nothing's happening. Now we got to shift twice, so we're not quite going all the way down because we've got the extra cable tension there. So the part that would drive you crazy, you're oh, well, now the rear's out of adjustment, so you adjust it to where that works now. So now you're good. Shift back to the small ring. Now we got our shiftings now, it's off now in the rear again. So that's typically what you'll see happen. And so if you get having some issue where you got everything hooked up, it's just not quite working right, then you always want to check that. So one of the ways you can kind of physically check these when it's in the bike, everything's hooked up, or if you want to, you can just grab hold of that rear derailleur by hand, and if there's no cable accessible there, maybe from the bottom bracket to the rear derailleur, and just grab hold of the rear derailleur and then pull the front shifter slightly, maybe not necessarily all the way into gear, but you should be able to feel some input into the rear derailleur, and that's kind of one way you can tell that they're hooked together, or it's looped through incorrectly there. Shift it up there, and if you watch it closely there. Whoop. And watch as I shift to the big ring. You'll see some input there from the down. Yeah, and that actually it happens every so often. You know, I've seen a few frames that have actually come from assembled from the factory that had that currents there happen, and you just never get shifting's never quite right in the rear there. So yeah, that's that particular issue, how to diagnose it and correct it. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and yeah, I'll put some links here to some other videos that some little homemade tools that might help somewhat for routing your internal cables. But anyways, yeah, that's the end of this one, and thanks for watching.